Some people laugh because they think they've found the weakest person in the room, until that person gives them a reason to never laugh the same way again. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across polished marble floors, where Manhattan's wealthiest families gathered for the annual Brooks Foundation Charity Gala. Conversations floated through the air beside the soft notes of a live orchestra, while champagne glasses reflected golden light like tiny stars. Every tailored tuxedo, every designer gown, every effortless smile carried the confidence of people who had never wondered how next month's rent would be paid. Moving quietly among them was Clara Bennett, 27 years old, her white blouse perfectly pressed beneath a simple black apron. She carried silver trays with practiced grace, never rushing, never drawing attention to herself. Guests barely looked at her. To them, she was another waitress blending into the background, part of the evening's flawless service, another invisible face hired to make luxury feel effortless. Clara preferred it that way. She acknowledged every guest with the same calm smile, her blue eyes gentle but unreadable. Even after 8 hours on her feet, there was still elegance in the way she balanced each tray, the way she anticipated every request before it was spoken. Quiet confidence often looked ordinary to people who never bothered to look twice. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel Brooks stood surrounded by investors, politicians, and celebrities. At 39, the self-made millionaire had built Brooks Capital into one of the fastest-growing investment firms in America. Financial magazines praised his instincts. Television hosts admired his confidence. Social media celebrated his lifestyle. He had grown accustomed to entering a room and becoming its center without trying. Tonight was no different. Every laugh seemed slightly louder when he spoke. Every conversation shifted toward him. Success had taught him many things, but humility had never been one of them. As the orchestra transitioned into a classic Argentine tango, Nathaniel glanced toward the dance floor where elegantly dressed couples hesitated before stepping into the spotlight. He smirked, swirling the last sip of sparkling water inside his crystal glass. Nobody knows how to dance anymore, he joked, earning polite laughter from the people around him. One of his friends noticed Clara passing nearby with a tray of desserts. Maybe your next dance partner is right there, he teased. Nathaniel looked over his shoulder. Clara stopped beside the table, quietly placing miniature cheesecakes in front of the guests without interrupting their conversation. She offered the same professional smile she gave everyone else. Nathaniel studied her for a second before amusement spread across his face. "Excuse me," he called. Clara turned politely. "Yes, sir. Do you dance?" A few nearby conversations faded as people sensed entertainment unfolding. Clara answered honestly. "Sometimes." Nathaniel grinned wider. "Sometimes." His friends exchanged amused glances. "Well then." He stepped away from the table and extended one hand toward the empty dance floor. "If you dance this tango with me." He paused just long enough for every nearby guest to notice. More faces turned. More phones quietly appeared above tables. "I'll marry you." Laughter rolled across the ballroom. It wasn't cruel enough to sound hostile, but it carried the unmistakable confidence of people convinced they already knew how the story would end. Someone clapped. Another guest chuckled into his drink. Even members of the orchestra exchanged uncertain glances while continuing to play. Nathaniel smiled, believing he had delivered the perfect joke. Clara remained perfectly still. She didn't blush. She didn't argue. She didn't force an embarrassed laugh to make everyone comfortable. She simply looked at Nathaniel with calm eyes that revealed nothing. For one long moment, the ballroom seemed quieter than before. Nathaniel mistook her silence for nervousness. "Don't worry," he added with a playful grin. "I'm making you a once-in-a-lifetime offer." More laughter followed. Yet Clara's expression never changed. Her fingers rested lightly against the silver tray she still carried. Her breathing stayed slow. Somewhere beyond the ballroom, windows, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, beneath the music and laughter, something almost invisible shifted. Nathaniel believed he had placed an ordinary waitress into an impossible situation. He had no idea that the next few minutes would quietly rewrite every assumption he had made the moment she walked into the room. Clara did not answer immediately. The orchestra continued its elegant rhythm while dozens of curious eyes remained fixed on her, waiting for embarrassment, outrage, or surrender. Instead, She offered the same composed expression she had worn all evening, as though nothing unusual had happened. The silver tray rested steadily in her hands. Not a single dessert trembled. Around her, whispers spread from table to table. Some guests smiled with amusement. Others exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that the moment had become more uncomfortable than entertaining. Nathaniel noticed none of it. He believed silence meant hesitation, and hesitation usually ended with people accepting whatever he proposed. It always had. Clara lowered her eyes for only a second before speaking with quiet courtesy. "Would you excuse me for just a moment, sir? I need to place these desserts where they belong." Her voice was gentle, neither sarcastic nor offended. That answer puzzled the crowd far more than an emotional reaction would have. Nathaniel laughed softly and stepped aside with a theatrical gesture. "Of course, we cannot let cheesecake stand in the way of destiny." More laughter echoed through the ballroom. Clara simply nodded and continued across the polished floor, serving each table exactly as she had before. She remembered every order without checking a single note. Coffee for one guest, tea for another, sugar on the side for an elderly woman who thanked her with a warm smile. Even after becoming the center of attention, she refused to rush. Her professionalism never slipped. Several members of the waitstaff watched nervously from the service station. "Is she really going back?" one whispered. Another shook his head. She should ignore him. He is making a spectacle out of her. Clara heard none of their comments. Or perhaps she did and chose not to react. Inside the employee hallway behind the ballroom, the music became softer. Crystal chandeliers gave way to plain white walls and stainless steel shelves. She set the empty tray onto a counter before opening a narrow locker with a small brass key. Hanging neatly inside was another black apron, a folded cardigan, and an old canvas garment bag that looked decades older than everything around it. She reached past the bag and gently lifted a worn pair of dance shoes wrapped inside a clean white cloth. The leather had softened with age. The satin ribbons had faded. Tiny marks across the soles revealed thousands of practiced steps. Clara brushed her fingertips across them with quiet affection. For the first time that evening, the smallest smile appeared. It lasted only a heartbeat before disappearing again. A young waitress named Emily approached carefully. "Clara, you do not have to prove anything to those people." Clara looked at her friend and smiled kindly. "I know. Then why are you taking those out?" Emily asked, glancing toward the shoes. Clara paused before answering. "Because sometimes respect begins when you respect yourself enough to stop hiding." Emily frowned with confusion. "You dance." Clara tied one ribbon around her fingers absent-mindedly. "A long time ago." She closed the locker gently and carried the shoes toward a small wooden bench beneath a mirror. Outside, the applause and laughter had faded into curious anticipation. Nathaniel remained near the center of the ballroom, chatting confidently with investors who congratulated him for creating the evening's unexpected entertainment. None of them noticed that the orchestra had quietly continued playing, repeating the same tango melody while waiting for someone to decide how the story would end. Nathaniel glanced toward the service hallway and smiled to himself. He expected a polite refusal or an awkward excuse. Either outcome would confirm everything he believed about power, status, and confidence. He had no reason to imagine that somewhere beyond those doors, the woman everyone had mistaken for ordinary was carefully tightening the ribbons on a pair of shoes that had once carried dreams. Far larger than anyone in that ballroom could possibly imagine. Clara sat quietly on the wooden bench as the sounds of conversation drifted faintly through the hallway. She loosened the laces of her plain black work shoes and placed them carefully beneath the bench before slipping her feet into the worn dance shoes that had waited patiently inside the locker for years. The leather molded to her feet as though no time had passed at all. She stood slowly, testing her balance with one measured step across the smooth floor. Nothing had changed. Her posture straightened almost effortlessly. Her shoulders relaxed. Even her breathing found a familiar rhythm. Emily watched in complete silence. The timid waitress she had worked beside for almost 3 years seemed to disappear, replaced by someone whose quiet confidence filled the narrow hallway without a single word. Clara caught her reflection in the mirror. For a brief moment, another memory appeared in her mind. Bright theater lights, a polished stage, rows of applauding strangers. Her father standing backstage with tears in his eyes, smiling with pride before reminding her of the lesson he repeated after every competition. Technique earns applause. Character earns respect. Clara closed her eyes for only a second before opening them again. The memory faded, but the words remained. She reached into the garment bag and removed a simple, deep burgundy practice skirt. It was elegant without being extravagant. She tied it neatly over her uniform, leaving the white blouse untouched. She was still a waitress. She had no desire to pretend otherwise. Meanwhile, the ballroom continued buzzing with anticipation. Nathaniel accepted another round of playful remarks from his friends. One investor laughed as he checked his expensive watch. She must be looking for an excuse to leave through the kitchen. Another shrugged. Can you blame her? Nobody wants to become tomorrow morning's viral joke. Nathaniel smiled confidently, although he noticed something unusual. The orchestra had not stopped playing. The musicians continued repeating the same tango melody with remarkable patience, almost as though the conductor sensed the evening was not finished. Nathaniel turned toward the bandleader. You are still waiting? The older conductor smiled politely. Good music deserves a proper ending, Mr. Brooks. Nathaniel chuckled without thinking much about the answer. Nearby guests continued raising their phones, hoping to capture whatever happened next. Some expected comedy. Others expected embarrassment. A few quietly hoped the waitress would refuse and walk away with dignity. None of them imagined another possibility. Then the service hallway doors opened. Conversations faded one after another until only the orchestra remained. Clara stepped into the ballroom with calm, measured strides. The burgundy skirt moved gently around her knees. The old dance shoes carried visible signs of countless rehearsals, their faded ribbons standing in sharp contrast to the polished luxury surrounding them. She looked neither richer nor more important than before. Yet something invisible had changed. Her posture carried effortless grace. Her chin remained level. Her eyes met the room without challenge and without fear. Nathaniel's confident smile softened into quiet curiosity. This was not the nervous employee he expected to tease for another minute before everyone returned to dinner. Clara stopped several feet away from him and folded her hands calmly in front of her. Mr. Brooks, she said with complete courtesy, if you still wish to dance, I would be honored to accept. A ripple of surprise swept across the ballroom. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, amused but suddenly intrigued. You are serious? Clara answered with a gentle smile. I believe every invitation deserves an honest answer. The orchestra seemed to breathe with relief as the conductor slowly lifted his baton once more. The ballroom fell completely silent. For the first time that evening, Nathaniel realized he no longer controlled the moment. Somehow, without raising her voice or challenging anyone, the quiet waitress had transformed a careless joke into something every person in the room suddenly felt compelled to witness. The conductor lowered his baton with deliberate calm, and the first measured notes of the tango drifted across the ballroom like a quiet invitation rather than a performance. Every conversation disappeared. Crystal glasses remained untouched. Even the servers paused behind the service stations, watching in complete silence. Nathaniel stepped onto the dance floor with the easy confidence of a man who believed every room eventually belonged to him. He extended his hand once again, expecting Clara to accept it with uncertainty. Instead, she placed her hand gently in his, her posture perfectly balanced, her expression warm but composed. There was no trace of resentment in her face, and somehow that unsettled him more than anger would have. He had expected to lead. The orchestra began the opening sequence. Nathaniel guided the first few steps with practiced confidence, surprising several guests who had not realized he could dance. His movements were polished enough for charity galas and formal celebrations, refined through expensive lessons taken years earlier as part of the social expectations surrounding his career. Applause rose softly from nearby tables. Someone whispered that the millionaire looked impressive. Clara followed the opening figures with effortless precision, matching every movement without hesitation. She never rushed. She never resisted. She simply listened to the music. Nathaniel smiled, convinced the audience had already seen everything worth seeing. Then the melody shifted. The tempo deepened. The conductor subtly increased the emotional weight of the arrangement, and something almost invisible changed between the two dancers. Clara's posture transformed. Every step became lighter, every turn more fluid, every pause more intentional. She was no longer counting movements. She was conversing with the music itself. Nathaniel noticed it first through the smallest details. Her timing anticipated every beat before it arrived. Her balance never faltered. Even the folds of her burgundy skirt seemed to move with the rhythm instead of against it. He adjusted his lead instinctively, but for the first time that evening he realized he was no longer guiding the dance as confidently as he had expected. Guests who had been recording for amusement slowly lowered their smiles and focused. On the floor with genuine curiosity, an elderly woman seated near the orchestra leaned toward her husband and whispered. She was trained. The conductor glanced briefly toward his violin section and smiled almost imperceptibly. Musicians recognized excellence long before audiences did. Clara continued moving with remarkable restraint. There were no dramatic flourishes designed to impress the crowd. Every step served the music. Every pause carried meaning. Her expression remained peaceful, almost reflective, as though she had stepped into a memory only she could see. Nathaniel felt something unfamiliar replacing his confidence. It was not fear. It was concentration. He realized he could no longer perform casually. Every movement required his full attention just to remain synchronized with the woman he had assumed would struggle to keep pace. Around them, applause faded completely. The ballroom had entered the kind of silence that appears only when people become afraid of interrupting something beautiful. Emily watched from the service entrance with tears quietly gathering in her eyes. She had served beside Clara for years without ever knowing this part of her life existed. The faded dance shoes, the careful posture, the quiet confidence, everything suddenly made sense. Nathaniel met Clara's eyes for only a brief second during a slow turn. He expected satisfaction or triumph. Instead, he found kindness. It was a look that carried neither revenge nor pride, only complete presence in the moment. That single glance unsettled him more deeply than any public criticism ever could. For the first time in many years, Nathaniel Brooks stopped thinking about how the audience saw him. His only thought became keeping up with the woman he had mistaken for ordinary. The music gathered strength without ever becoming loud, filling the ballroom with quiet confidence instead of spectacle. Every measured step revealed another layer of Clara that no one had imagined existed. She moved with remarkable discipline, allowing the rhythm to breathe before answering it with effortless precision. Her footwork was graceful but never flashy. Every pivot flowed naturally into the next movement, every pause carrying purpose rather than hesitation. Nathaniel followed with growing concentration. He had entered the dance believing he would impress the room. Now he found himself studying Clara instead of the audience. For the first time in years, he stopped wondering who was watching him. He cared only about keeping the rhythm alive. The orchestra noticed the change immediately. The conductor exchanged a quiet glance with the concert pianist before subtly expanding the arrangement, adding richer harmonies that invited greater expression. Clara responded instinctively, as though she had known the music her entire life. She did not perform for applause. She simply listened. That difference transformed everything. The guests sensed it without understanding why. Several phones that had been raised to capture an amusing moment slowly lowered. Nobody wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. A respected dance instructor attending the gala leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "That is not someone who learned from weekend lessons. That is years of discipline." Across the room, Emily quietly smiled through misty eyes. She remembered countless evenings when Clara stayed after closing, sweeping floors, helping the kitchen staff, comforting nervous new employees, and never once mentioning another life beyond the restaurant. The old dance shoes resting beneath her uniform suddenly explained the calm dignity she carried every day. They had never been reminders of what she had lost. They were reminders of who she still was. Nathaniel sensed another subtle shift as Clara completed a slow turn with remarkable balance. Without speaking, she adjusted their distance by only a few inches, making his next movement easier instead of more difficult. She was protecting the dance rather than trying to prove herself. That unexpected generosity unsettled him. He had challenged her publicly, yet she refused to embarrass him in return. Instead, she quietly made him look better than he deserved. He met her eyes again. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" he asked softly, careful not to break the rhythm. Clara answered with the faintest smile. "From someone who believed excellence should remain humble." The words stayed with him long after she spoke them. They were not defensive. They were not proud. They sounded like a lesson repeated many times over many years. The orchestra reached another elegant passage, and Clara completed a graceful sequence that drew a quiet breath from nearly everyone watching. No dramatic flourish followed. No theatrical pose. She simply continued, treating every movement with the same respect. Nathaniel realized something uncomfortable. He had spent much of his career believing extraordinary people announced themselves through confidence, wealth, or reputation. Clara had done the opposite. She had remained invisible until the moment character became impossible to ignore. Around the ballroom, conversations remained absent. Even the waitstaff stood motionless beside polished serving carts. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across the marble floor, while rain continued tapping gently against the tall windows, creating a peaceful rhythm beneath the music. Nathaniel no longer felt like the host of the evening. He felt like another student standing beside someone who understood a language he had barely begun to hear. As the final movement of the dance approached, applause no longer seemed important. Respect had quietly replaced entertainment, and without anyone realizing exactly when it happened, the woman who had entered the ballroom carrying dessert trays had become the person every eye followed with genuine admiration. The final phrase of the tango unfolded with quiet elegance, and Clara allowed the last note to linger before bringing the dance to its natural conclusion. There was no dramatic flourish, no triumphant gesture, only a graceful step backward as she released Nathaniel's hand with the same courtesy she had shown when accepting it. For a heartbeat, the ballroom remained completely silent. No one seemed willing to disturb what they had just witnessed. Then, almost as if the entire room had remembered how to breathe at the same moment, applause rose slowly from every corner of the ballroom. It began with a few guests standing near the orchestra, then spread from table to table, until nearly everyone was on their feet. The applause was different from the laughter that had filled the room only minutes earlier. This was not amusement. It was respect. Nathaniel stood motionless in the center of the dance floor, his breathing slightly heavier than before. His attention was no longer on the crowd. He watched Clara quietly adjust the ribbon on one of her shoes before smoothing the edge of her burgundy practice skirt with calm, practiced movements. There was no trace of satisfaction on her face. She behaved as though she had simply completed another ordinary task with care. The conductor lowered his baton and smiled warmly. He walked a few steps toward Clara before offering a respectful nod. "Thank you," he said softly. "It has been many years since this ballroom has truly listened to music." Clara returned the gesture with quiet humility. The orchestra made it easy. Several guests exchanged surprised glances. Even now, after receiving the admiration of an entire ballroom, she redirected the praise towards someone else. Emily watched from across the room, unable to stop smiling. The woman who had spent countless evenings carrying trays, cleaning tables, and encouraging nervous coworkers had not changed at all. Only everyone else had finally begun to see her clearly. Nathaniel slowly stepped closer. His confident expression had softened into genuine curiosity. "Clara," he said, speaking quietly enough that only those nearest could hear, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him with calm blue eyes. "For what?" He hesitated. The question was simple, yet the answer felt unexpectedly difficult. "For believing I already knew who you were before I even asked your name." Clara held his gaze for a moment before offering a gentle smile. "Many people do." There was no bitterness in her voice, only quiet truth. Nathaniel glanced toward the old dance shoes that had carried her across the marble floor with effortless grace. "You could have embarrassed me tonight," he admitted. "There were countless moments when you could have made me look foolish in front of everyone." Clara answered without hesitation. "That was never my goal." "Why not?" he asked. "Honestly, because respect cannot be earned by taking someone else's away." Her words settled over the nearby guests with surprising weight. Several people lowered their eyes, remembering the laughter that had echoed through the ballroom earlier that evening. Nathaniel looked around the room for the first time since the dance had begun. He noticed expressions he had overlooked before. The elderly couple smiling warmly near the orchestra. The young servers standing proudly beside the service station. The investors who no longer looked entertained, but thoughtful. He realized the evening had changed without anyone announcing it. Not because someone had won, because assumptions had quietly fallen apart. Clara bent slightly to pick up the apron she had folded neatly beside the dance floor before the music began. She slipped it back over her shoulders with the same care she had shown throughout the evening. The simple gesture surprised Nathaniel more than the dance itself. She did not see serving others as something beneath her. She carried herself with the same dignity whether she wore dance shoes or a waitress's apron. As she prepared to return to work, Nathaniel understood that the most extraordinary part of the evening had never been the tango. It was the quiet strength of a woman who had never needed recognition to know her own worth. The ballroom slowly returned to life, but the atmosphere had changed in ways no decoration or performance could have created. Conversations resumed in quieter voices. Guests who had arrived expecting another elegant charity evening now found themselves discussing the woman who had spoken the fewest words in the room. Clara gathered the empty dessert plates with the same steady rhythm she had shown before the music began. She thanked each guest who handed her a plate, smiled warmly at an elderly couple who complimented the orchestra, and quietly returned to her work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Nathaniel watched from several feet away, unable to reconcile the image before him with the assumptions he had carried only an hour earlier. Success had taught him to evaluate people quickly. He had built companies by making decisions in minutes that others debated for months. Yet every instinct he trusted had failed him tonight. He approached the service station where Clara was arranging polished silverware onto a fresh tray. "May I ask you something?" he said, his tone noticeably gentler than before. Clara looked up and nodded. "Of course. Why are you working here?" The question carried no judgment now, only genuine curiosity. Clara placed the last fork in its proper place before answering. "Because honest work is still honest work." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "That sounds like part of the answer." "It is," she replied. "The rest belongs to my family." Before he could ask another question, an older gentleman approached them with measured steps. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime around the performing arts. Several members of the orchestra greeted him respectfully as he passed. He stopped beside Clara and smiled warmly. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I wondered if it was really you." Clara's eyes brightened with pleasant surprise. "Mr. Whitmore." Nathaniel glanced between them. "You know each other?" The older man chuckled softly. "Know each other? I had the privilege of judging one of the finest youth tango competitions in the country nearly 15 years ago." He looked back at Clara with unmistakable admiration. She was the youngest finalist that year, and the only contestant who made an entire theater forget it was watching a competition. Several nearby guests turned toward the conversation. Nathaniel remained silent. Mr. Whitmore continued, "People remember trophies. I remember performances. Hers was unforgettable." Clara lowered her eyes modestly. "That was a long time ago. Excellence does not disappear with time," the older man replied. "It simply waits until someone notices it again." Nathaniel felt the weight of those words settle heavily in his thoughts. He realized the dance had not been an unexpected talent discovered by chance. It had been the quiet continuation of years of dedication hidden beneath an ordinary uniform. Clara thanked Mr. Whitmore for his kindness before excusing herself to deliver another tray of coffee. She moved through the ballroom exactly as she had at the beginning of the evening, greeting every guest with patience and respect. Nothing about her demeanor suggested she believed herself more important because people finally recognized her ability. Nathaniel watched her disappear into the crowd, carrying coffee cups instead of applause, and he understood something that no business seminar, financial success, or public recognition had ever taught him. Real confidence did not demand attention. It remained unchanged whether the room was laughing, applauding, or looking the other way. The evening gradually settled back into its elegant rhythm, yet something invisible had shifted inside the grand ballroom. The orchestra resumed a collection of lighter melodies. Conversations slowly returned, and waitstaff continued moving gracefully between the tables, but no one seemed interested in discussing business deals anymore. Instead, guests quietly shared the same question with one another. Who was Clara Bennett before she became a waitress? Clara, meanwhile, continued serving coffee and dessert with exactly the same quiet professionalism she had shown from the beginning of the evening. She greeted each guest with patience, thanked them for their kindness, and never mentioned the dance unless someone spoke about it first. To her, the applause had already become part of the past. The next cup of coffee deserved the same attention as the final step of the tango. Nathaniel found himself watching her from across the room more than once. It was not fascination with her talent alone. It was admiration for her consistency. Whether she stood beneath crystal chandeliers or behind a service station, she carried herself with the same calm dignity. Success had never changed her because recognition had never defined her. Finally, Nathaniel approached once more, this time carrying 2 untouched cups of coffee he had requested from another server. "Would you take a short break?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated for a moment before nodding. They stepped toward a quiet corner near the tall windows overlooking the rain-soaked Manhattan skyline. Outside, city lights shimmered across wet streets. Inside, the ballroom glowed with warmth. Nathaniel placed 1 cup in front of her. "I realized something tonight," he said. "For years I believed confidence came from achievement. I believed respect followed wealth, influence, and reputation. You proved that I understood very little." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup before answering. Sometimes success becomes so loud that it is difficult to hear quiet truths. Nathaniel smiled thoughtfully. "You always choose your words carefully, do not you?" She laughed softly for the first time that evening. "My father used to say that words should improve silence before they replace it." Nathaniel looked toward the rain outside. "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was," Clara replied. "He taught dance at a small community studio. We never had much money, but he believed every lesson should make someone kinder before making them better." Nathaniel remained silent, allowing her to continue if she wished. "When he became ill several years ago," Clara said quietly, "I stopped competing. Medical bills became more important than trophies. After he passed away, I kept the shoes because they reminded me that losing an opportunity does not mean losing yourself." Nathaniel lowered his eyes. Suddenly the faded ribbons, the careful movements, and the remarkable humility all fit together. "I am sorry," he said sincerely. Clara nodded with gratitude, but without sadness. Life asks different things from different people. Mine simply changed direction. Nathaniel took a slow breath. "If someone offered you another chance to return to the stage, would you accept it?" Clara looked toward the dancers now enjoying the open floor. A gentle smile appeared. "I never stopped dancing. Sometimes the stage is large. Sometimes it is a quiet ballroom after serving dinner. The place matters less than the reason you dance." Her answer lingered between them long after she finished speaking. Nathaniel realized that while he had spent years chasing larger stages, larger audiences, and larger accomplishments, Clara had quietly protected something far more valuable. She had protected her character. A member of the event staff approached politely to let Clara know another table had requested coffee. She stood immediately, smoothing her apron with familiar care. Nathaniel instinctively reached into his jacket and removed his business card before pausing. For a brief moment, he considered offering opportunities, introductions, and financial support. Then he slowly returned the card to his pocket. Tonight was not about changing Clara's life. It was about changing his own. As Clara walked back across the ballroom carrying a silver coffee pot beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers, Nathaniel understood that true greatness did not announce itself with wealth or applause. Sometimes it quietly refilled a stranger's coffee while carrying extraordinary grace where almost no one thought to look. Nearly 1 year passed before Nathaniel Brooks and Clara Bennett stood in the same room again. The ballroom had been replaced by a bright community arts center on Manhattan's west side, where sunlight streamed through tall windows instead of crystal chandeliers. Children's laughter echoed down the hallway as music drifted from several practice studios. Some students were learning ballet. Others practiced piano. In the largest room, a group of teenagers carefully rehearsed the first steps of the tango under Clara's patient guidance. She moved among them with the same quiet grace she had carried through the charity gala, correcting posture with gentle encouragement and celebrating small improvements more enthusiastically than perfect performances. Nothing about her suggested she had become interested in fame. Her greatest satisfaction came from watching hesitant students slowly discover confidence they never knew they possessed. A small bronze plaque near the entrance read, "Bennett Community Dance Academy." Beneath it, another line read, "Every person deserves the chance to discover their own rhythm." Nathaniel paused before the plaque for several seconds. He had funded the renovation anonymously after learning that Clara had dreamed of opening a community studio where families of every income level could study dance. She had agreed to accept the support only after. insisting that every financial record remain transparent and that scholarships receive priority over decorations. The building reflected exactly that philosophy. It was beautiful because it was useful rather than extravagant. Nathaniel stepped quietly into the practice room without interrupting the lesson. Clara noticed him only after the music ended and her students applauded one another for their effort. "Excellent," she said warmly. "Remember, perfection is never the first goal. Listening is." The students thanked her before gathering their bags and leaving with cheerful conversations filling the hallway. One little girl stopped beside Nathaniel and smiled proudly. "Miss Clara says everyone can learn if they are patient." Nathaniel smiled back. "I think she is right." After the room became quiet again, Clara walked toward him with the same calm smile he remembered from the gala. "Welcome," she said. "I wondered if you might visit someday." Nathaniel looked around the studio before answering. Photographs of student recitals lined one wall. A framed picture of Clara's father hung near the piano, his expression warm and encouraging. In another corner rested the same worn dance shoes she had worn that unforgettable evening, now displayed inside a simple glass case instead of hidden inside a locker. "You kept them," Nathaniel said softly. Clara nodded. "They remind me where I started, not where I finished." Nathaniel smiled thoughtfully. "I spent years believing success meant reaching higher places. You taught me that it also means remembering the ground beneath your feet." Clara laughed gently. "Then perhaps we both learned something that night." Nathaniel looked around the room once more. "You know, people still ask me about that gala. They expect me to talk about the dance." "And what do you tell them?" Clara asked. He answered without hesitation. "I tell them the dance lasted only a few minutes. The lesson has stayed with me ever since." Clara's eyes reflected quiet gratitude. Outside the studio, another class of eager students began arriving, carrying dance bags that looked almost too large for their shoulders. They greeted Clara enthusiastically, and she greeted every one of them by name. Nathaniel stepped aside to let them enter, realizing that the most meaningful promises were not spoken in grand ballrooms beneath dazzling lights. They were fulfilled through ordinary acts repeated with extraordinary consistency. As he walked toward the exit, he glanced back one final time. Clara was already helping a nervous beginner find the correct first step, smiling with patient encouragement exactly as her father had once taught her. Nathaniel understood then that true greatness never asks the world to look at it. It quietly gives others the confidence to stand a little taller, dream a little farther, and believe that dignity is never measured by a title, a fortune, or an audience. It is measured by the grace a person carries long after the music has ended.